Welcome everybody to the channel. I'm glad you're here with us at High Value Writing. Today is going to be a lot of fun. We're talking with Jen MacDonald, who is a change expert and also has huge expertise in personality. She's got a background in journalism, so she knows a whole lot about communication. And we're going to be talking today about the relationship between writing, reading, and personality. So welcome, Jen, to the channel.
Thanks so much for having me, Erin. I'm happy to be part of the high value writing team for today, at least.
That's right. Awesome. No, it's great teaming up with you as always. So like I said, Jen has a huge background in understanding and teaching aspects of personality that impact our communication and our work styles. And we've been talking together and we thought, well, isn't it true that when we write, we always should think about our audience, and isn't an audience a person with a personality? So we thought, ooh, I bet Jen has some fantastic advice for those of us who are trying to write to our audience. And so we'll start by, we're just going to kind of have a casual conversation together, and you all can put in questions in the comments if you want us to add on anything. But we'll just start by saying, hey, when I'm writing for work, I'm trying to think of the person on the other side. It's all about the audience. But I think we often feel, well, I know my audience's needs. I know my audience's background knowledge, but we forget to think about who are they as a human? What's their disposition? What's their personality? What are their preferences?
Yeah.
How might we start changing that habit and start thinking about personality when we're writing to somebody?
Well, I think that's you've raised some really great points, and you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of personality, because personality is really about what are the needs and what are the preferences. And those can differ depending on the audience because those differ from person to person, right? So I think that the key is to be objective to a degree. Like, it's nice to write for yourself, but I mean, Erin, you and I both know that we're a rare personality type, right? We're both INTJ. So we're, introverted, intuitive, we're thinking, we're judging, but not judgmental. And so for us, when I'm writing for myself, or if I was writing for you, what we need to know is, what is the idea behind something, right? We have a real need to be perceptive. And so that's great if I'm writing for me or you, but we're only 1% of the population, right? So if you're writing for a larger audience, so for example, if you're at work and you're writing for a bunch of different teams, those different teams have different needs and preferences based on personality. And then sometimes it's also based on the type of work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. So for example, INTJs enjoy communication, right? Oddly enough, because we like ideas. And even though we're introverted, we like to share them, right? That's really important to us, and that helps us meet our needs. So it's important to think about yourself when you're writing, because, you're a person too, but to think about what are the actual needs that you need to meet and the information that people need to know in order to understand the information and feel better about whatever you're telling them.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I like how you pointed out that needs and preferences are sort of actually about how we like to approach information, how we like to communicate, how we tend to behave. I think, at least when I'm doing writing workshops, we often talk about the reader's needs only in a tangible way. Like, they need to know which 3 candidates are ready for the interview. They need to know how to update the system. But we're talking more about needs and preferences in terms of, how might my reader need to receive information? Yeah. Are there different ways that I should consider? Like you said earlier, knowing you and me are the same, and we like ideas. I could email you and just be like, blah, blah, blah about an idea, and you'd be fine with it. I bet that won't work for other people I want to email my ideas to. What are there some things that you consider, whether it's about ordering or length or tone and things, that we would adjust based on the personality of our reader?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. You and I could send each other an extremely long email with a whole bunch of links to other things that we're interested in. And, we'd be thinking, oh, this is fascinating. And then we would spend 3 hours going through it. and enjoying it and then respond back. If you send that same email to somebody who does not have our personality type, that is an overwhelming amount of information.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody needs to know the huge big picture, right? So you want to include some sprinkles of things throughout your writing, especially business writing. So you want to make sure that the big idea is there, because that big picture really does help people. Like, what are we going for? What is the accomplishment? What is the vision? But again, scaling that back just to make sure that people aren't overwhelmed. You also want to put some tangible things in there, and you want to limit it. And I'm sure you know this, the rule of three, right? It's kind of like, okay, so here are the three things that you need to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you also want to put something in there about where people can go if they need more information or if they need help. Because, when you think about any of us who, took psychology, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so you're looking at that sort of safety, security right at the bottom. If it's too intangible, and if there aren't actionable things in there, or if there's nothing for people to kind of get their arms around, that can create a lot of confusion, and that can leave people feeling unsettled. And, the brain likes to have stories, right? That's what we're thinking all the time. So if there's nothing for the brain to attach to, if we're not telling the right story, people will make up stories in their own mind. And that's where you get people, they read the email and you think to yourself, well, but I communicated everything and this is completely different from what I wrote. It's because one of their needs hasn't been met.
Interesting, because as you were describing that, I was thinking, oh, they have a different interpretation of what I meant in the email. And it's because of their needs, right? Where maybe I thought, well, my foundational needs, I feel safe when someone gives me a random email with too many ideas in it.
Yes.
Somebody else does not feel safe. And I think we all feel safer when there's something tangible, like you said, to hold on to. But that concept of psychological safety, we hear about that with working in teams and with management, but we don't hear about it as much with writing, where of course we're never writing to make someone unsafe, but we might be forgetting that based on their personality, they really need certain gestures in the writing, like including something tangible, including a story, including bullets, limiting the length based on personality.
Yes.
So you mentioned the rule of three, and I think that's a great advice for all of us. We can kind of try to teach about three things in an email or something like that. That's what the brain can consider. Now, you talked about INTJs, for example, liking big picture. And actually, I have been told that my emails can be too much sometimes. And as a writing teacher, it's a little embarrassing, but I think, I like all this. Other people don't. So I adapt to what other people want. Are there any personality types that really just want the bottom line? Can you think of any personality types that are like, we don't want any details, we want tons of details? How does it break down around details and things like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, it's easy. It can be difficult to determine specifically what someone's personality type is. And if you're in an office that you haven't gone through, personality typing, it can be challenging. But if you think about the extroverts versus the introverts, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there has been a bit of a quiet revolution, which is, very welcome to me over the past, especially few years, as we all kind of turned inward, working, from home and that type of thing. But if you look for the extroverts, so those are the people who will wander around to people's desks and just to chat and say, hi, how was your weekend? That type of thing. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to high five or something like that, right? That's more external. You can really see that. So extroverts do tend to like less detail. They prefer personalization, right? And so again, what is it, putting a name in, what does it specifically mean to them? That can be very important. And teamwork, that can be very important to them. So sometimes it's more about, what does this mean for the team? And, and again, that's also someone who has perhaps maybe a more a feeling, rather than, INTJ, that would be INFJ.
Yeah.
The feeling personality type. Oh, well, what does this mean to the team as well, right? So putting those
Yeah.
little sprinkles in, and maybe dialing back on the details. So for example,
Hmm.
if you're, writing for a large company, the sales team is likely going to want, less detail, sort of the big picture. What are the objectives, right? What do we want to get out of this? And what does it mean for the team? And then maybe something a little fun in there, right?
Hmm.
Whereas the introverts may want, so for example, if it was, people in the, computer department or something like that, they will likely want to know more details. They want time to think about things and what's expected and what's coming down the pipe, right? So you can kind of look at different departments. And again, we
Yeah.
never want to pigeonhole people,
Right.
and anybody can do any job, right? But typically people do jobs based on their needs and their preferences. And what are their
Yeah.
needs and preferences? It's their personality.
Personality.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense that, yeah, we can't assume, oh, looks like an introvert to me or something like that. But if we see an entire sales team, we can kind of think, well, that's a job that causes people to go talk to each other all day. Probably extroverts are in sales teams.
Yeah.
And so probably I want to scale back the details and increase the amount of relevance to that person or to that sale. And then if I'm writing to an introvert who I think is an introvert that I've kind of gauged, oh, they kind of keep to themselves at their desk, they're fine getting in flow on their own, I can get a little more detailed with that person maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think too, timing is important. So for example, if you're holding a brainstorming session,
Mhm.
make sure to share the details, broadly about what you're talking about, because again, many personality types, particularly introverted personality types, we need to have the time to think about things, right,
Mm.
before coming up with the ideas, because extroverts are ideating as they speak.
Mhm.
Introverts don't do that. And so if you have a brainstorming session where introverts haven't had the time to prepare, you have a whole bunch of extroverts talking things through, and then there's no space for the introverts. So it's either a question of provide the big picture details, or here's a broad strokes what we're going to talk about, and here's what you can start thinking about, or give people the opportunity to connect with you after the session, even for like 15-minute meeting, 30-minute meeting, or just to talk things through, because you do run the risk of missing out on some really thoughtful, great ideas, just because there's no space for the introvert to be able to express those ideas.
Well, it's so interesting how, because like all aspects of communication, it's not just the words, but the timing, how we deliver them, when we deliver them. And so that idea, yeah, I've had that experience as a teacher. I remember once teaching the same class to a college, literally 2 times in a row at a college. And the first group was noisy, in a good, fun way the first day, and we had a great time. And the second group was silent. And then as we went through the weeks, the second group got louder, because they were more the introverts who took some time. The extroverts were ready to speak in the first session.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think we can adapt a little bit of our writing in that sense, thinking about what people need on that end. So what if I'm the reader, though? Sometimes I read what another person has sent me, and I think, ooh, I wish they would have told me a little more, or I don't really like that tone. And I'm thinking, well, now am I interpreting them wrong? Is there any kind of work I should do as a reader to think about either my personality or the personality of the writer as I interpret their writing?
Well, I think it really depends, as again, with so many things in communication, where it's coming from.
Mm.
So, something, especially if I tend to see this a lot with the extrovert sending something to the introvert or vice versa, that's where a lot of times the miscommunication can come through, or the thinker versus the feeler, right? Because again, and again, talking about me just because I have the most experience with me, but sometimes again with the detail and that sort of thing, but I have to be mindful that I don't come across as aloof or too technical.
Oh,
Because
okay.
again, that's what idea, but the idea is very detached, right? It's not really
Right.
like the person, right? So that's what I'm mindful of when I'm writing. And I think reading, it can be the same thing. So sometimes if something seems maybe too informal or
Mhm.
overly familiar, like, hey, how's it going? Da, 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 da. Sometimes it can be like, oh, but then it's a matter of, okay, well, this is again somebody who's team focused, more
Yeah.
informal, likely more extroverted, and this is where it's coming from. And you can always, if you know the person, you can always reach out to them just to say, hey, this is what these were my takeaways from the email. Is, are we on the same page, or am I understanding this correctly? Or, can you, clarify for me? Right.
Right.
And I think making it more about, here are my takeaways,
Mm.
are you on side with that, rather than you didn't
Yeah.
communicate that to me properly. Right. So again, it's always making it about, this is my understanding. Can you, clarify for me?
Mhm.
Is this what you meant, or are these the outcomes that you wanted? I mean, obviously that doesn't apply to anything that's, rude or unprofessional or anything like
Sure.
that. But I think we're talking about just different
Nuance.
interpretations based on
Yeah.
different styles.
Well, yeah, and I really like what you said. I mean, I don't think I've thought about it in this way. If I'm reading as an introvert, I'm probably kind of excited when I get an email that goes on and on about the idea. And when the email is about the self or different people's roles in the assignment, I'm maybe less enthused. Whereas an extrovert might, and depends on the rest of their personality, of course, but they might more want the information about the team,
Yeah.
who's going to do what, the person's involved, and they might be like, enough is enough about the idea. Just give me the bottom line. I don't need the whole idea.
Yeah.
So gauging. And then as a reader, I could think, why did they, harass me with all these details? Oh, well, to them, it's important in their personality type.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
benevolent, right? It's just it's not aligned in that way.
And for
Yeah.
us, we like details, but only if it's something we're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is that people will often mistake INTJ for being detail oriented, but we are, but only if it's relating to an interesting idea.
Mm.
Right. And so, it's these little nuances that I think it's very helpful for people to do a little research into, different personality types, or even just talking to colleagues and, hey, do you like to get a heads up before something happens, or do you like the excitement of not knowing? Right.
Right.
Like, would you feel better if I, messaged you a couple of days before something was happening and gave you some information? Would you get more out of this meeting if I did that? Or do you like that immediacy, and that, some people get a real charge out of it, just like, some people like to wait until a deadline's close, and
Mm-hmm.
then the juices really get flowing. Other people, that causes them a great deal of anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. When we're in a work team, there are usually a couple people that you're emailing throughout each day. And why not have that conversation? What makes things easier or more comfortable for you? Is it when I give you more details or fewer? Is it when I
Yeah.
use a bunch of headings and make it pretty, or I don't? Is it when, I give you a heads up, or I think, ooh, she really likes change, I'm just going to spring it on her?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask a follow-up too. You mentioned, we've talked a little about introverts and extroverts, and I think that's a good one to start with, since that's, like you were saying, we can often kind of observe behaviors and guess what someone might be. But it sounds like the think and feel
Yeah.
difference is also quite important here.
Yeah.
Any tips on either how to be respectful of thinkers or feelers when we write, or are there any ways to sort of guesstimate who might be one or the other?
I think that a great way to guesstimate is really to either based on what people are saying or how they're writing. So I will often end an email, if I'm looking for feedback, thoughts, That's usually what I will write.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone who's a feeler may ask something like, are you okay with that?
Do you like
How do
it?
you feel about that?
Oh,
That type of thing. So that's usually a good way to tell, is really just based on the language that people are
yeah.
using.
Sort of like we can read their email or text or DM and say, do they seem, with what we talked about before, we could say, do they seem to focus more on idea or people?
Yeah.
And now we could be like, do they seem to focus more on thoughts or feelings?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we would know, well, when I write to them, I'm going to do that as well. So it's relevant for them potentially.
Exactly. And so, for example, if it was somebody who I knew was more of the, in the feeling type, it would be, how do you feel about this?
Yeah.
Or are you comfortable with this? Right.
Right.
And that really makes a difference, because you're acknowledging, when we talk about, inclusive, language and being inclusive in the workplace, that language and these types of preferences, based on personality, that's a really important part of it, because again, that helps people feel included. And I'm actually then expanding my horizons and helping my brain create new neural pathways and stuff, just by accessing different parts of my brain and thinking, oh yeah, if I was the feeling type, what would I write, or what would I put down? And it's really beneficial for both parties.
Right. It can expand.
Yep.
Contributes to growth.
Yeah.
Emotionally, intellectually. And I think you're right. It is a matter of inclusion, because often when people say somebody isn't a good fit, it's because of behaviors they've perceived that are confusing to them for some reason. I think. I mean, I remember sitting on a panel. Yeah. 100%. Well, because I remember sitting on a panel and, long ago, the person at the very top of the panel had actually made a big statement about how this would be all about inclusion, and we would make sure to not be biased in our interviewing. And yet, when a person came in with a different style of conversation and a different personality type with the way she would behave and the way she would speak, people talked about it as if she weren't speaking in the correct way. And I said, well, I thought this wasn't going to be inclusive. We're looking for the holistic person, including their personality and behavior, not just what's written on a piece of paper. So we have to allow for that. And we can learn about that by the writing. I actually wrote a text to someone recently where I just put thoughts at the end. And then I sort of bellyached about it for the next day. I thought, oh, was that rude? Because maybe she was a feeler, and maybe that's why I worried it was rude. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't think, and it's probably not rude, but if you're not sure, or if you want to kind of gauge somebody, you could say, interested to know your thoughts or feelings about this. And then they'll respond, well, I feel da 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 da, and then okay, so that's again another clue and another insight into really improving the relationship and improving the communications.
Could we then almost gauge ourselves by just observing when we write something? Do we tend to say, I think we should blah, blah, or I feel we should blah, blah? Because I say I think, and I bet you do too.
I do too.
I know people who say I feel. So it's a great way to learn about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am.
Right.
But that's not how a big percentage of the population is, right? And, and I think going back to what you had said about, somebody speaking and it was, somewhat different. And you hear people say, well, this person's not a team player. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean this person doesn't communicate the same way I do? Right. And then that's, and that I remember I did a workshop for a team, and I did the, personality assessments for the team, and the managing director, I said to her, you need to stop hiring people who are just like you, because on her team, they were all, very, it's sort of the, feeler, team oriented, et cetera. But I said, you can't have an entire team like that. And I said, the people who aren't like that are feeling left out, right? Based
Right.
on my interviews with them. So that's another thing too, I think, examining, your own biases about differences in personality and differences in communication in terms of, you know, having somebody who's different from you and communicates differently. That's an excellent challenge because it'll help improve your writing because you'll get feedback
Mhm.
and you'll get that understanding of, oh, well, I meant it this way, but this isn't how, this
Received it.
person with the, extroverted feeling
Yeah.
type perceived it. And so how can I expand that, and how can I improve my writing so that everybody, for the most part, gets it?
Yeah. Well, and especially because, as I've said in classes often, folks, unless you're journaling or taking notes, you are not writing for you.
Yep.
Almost any time we ever write a sentence or a phrase on a text, it's for another person. And so interesting that I can say now, well, I've written most of my writing that's for other people out of my own introverted thinker mind. And perhaps they're like, oh, this leaves something to be desired, so I could get a little bit more well-rounded if I start thinking about the feelers in my audience as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, you can look at it in your own home. Like, for example, so my husband,
Mhm.
so he's on the, he's the sensing feeling side, right? So often if I've written something, I'll say, how do you feel about this? And he'll read it, and so he can give me that perspective. And so if I guess for people who are maybe might be more reticent about, scoping this out at work, try it at home.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so too. Often when we talk about communication, we can take these skills into our homes as well as the workplace.
Yeah.
Well, Jen, we should probably start wrapping up. I know we've been chatting for a while because it's so interesting. So I wanted to ask before we start to wrap up, is there any kind of advice that we haven't covered that you often give to people when they're communicating across personalities that you think would be helpful for high value writers as well?
Well, I think that having an open mind and an open heart are really the two touchstones to effective communication. And there's always room for improvement. And opening yourself up, it can feel very vulnerable when you're writing. And because again, that's your idea, these are your thoughts, these are your feelings, for people who are the feelers. But to just really be open to feedback, because it will only make your writing better.
Well, right. And as you've said, getting the feedback from someone who's a different personality type can make it expand even more.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, thank you, Jen. Folks, I hope you got some tidbits there that you can think about with your own business writing. Of course, our writing is about relationships. And so it's really important to think, who is this person? To the extent that you can ask them when you're not sure, you can observe them when you're not sure. So thank you, Jen, for being here. And folks, hit us up in the comments if you have a question. We'll get back to you. Thanks for being here at High Value Writing, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks a lot, Erin. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.